Hi friends, so if you follow Twitter at all, you probably, and if you sort of follow this channel at all, you probably realize by now that Twitter is just an arm of the propaganda arm of the national security state, the military-industrial complex, and various industries. Whoever basically wants to pay a lot of money to have a certain hashtag trending, or to push it, to basically pay trolls, troll farms to press a particular narrative, or just pay trolls to do so. That's what's happening now on Twitter. It's really become a bit of a cesspool of trolling and propaganda. I'm not talking about the quote-unquote fake news that the Democratic Party complains about, anything that basically is addressing US imperialism and all that sort of thing. The word fake news is kind of, unfortunately, being used against the left, sadly, and anything that is pushing against US imperialism, etc., is considered propaganda, it's considered conspiratorial and so forth. But anyway, I'm going to talk a little bit about what's happening in relation to the Australian fires. Being an Australian myself and having experienced the fires firsthand here in Tasmania at the beginning of last year, it was pretty awful. I did a few videos on it. We weren't actually directly affected, meaning the area that I live in across the river from where it was actually happening, fortunately was spared, but across the river there was about 180,000 hectares of forest, old growth and all sorts of things. Many animals all went up in flames, and it was very sad indeed. And so this is, of course, what's happening on the mainland is kind of apocalyptic, basically. I mean, there are 70 meter high flames happening all up and down the New South Wales coast. People sometimes are being told it's too late to leave, just seek shelter. This is sort of, if you watch people like Celeste Barber, who is a comedian, she's been posting stuff on her Instagram account about people in Eden on the New South Wales coast who have been pretty much abandoned by Scott Morrison up until there started to be attention brought to this. And fortunately, the international community has realised now how dire things are here in Australia, on the mainland in particular. I think hopefully we'll be spared this year in Tasmania, but who knows? I don't know. The summer is just starting, so I don't know how it's going to go here. And but on the mainland, all over Australia, if you look at a map, there's dotted fires everywhere, and some of them are massive, and some of them are coming together and joining into a mega fire. Ecologists from the University of Sydney have said that the animal cost, the amount of animals who are probably being killed, I don't know how they estimate this, but they say it would be close to 1 billion with a B, animals. That's all kinds of animals. And of course, sadly, they don't include animals that are trapped in paddocks, and I'm going to get to that next in a little bit. Animals trapped in paddocks like cows and so forth. I'm not going to show you any graphic images. I don't believe in that. I think you can get an idea of what that might look like. Animals being trapped in paddocks and being burned alive. There's a number of videos. Sadly, people don't seem to consider that animals that are in paddocks, like cows, etc., who suffer just as much as the koalas that are being burned alive, and they consider it more like a property loss. And animals are considered property, so that's not surprising, but it's amazing how we compartmentalize cows, sheep, etc., as if they don't suffer, and as if all that matters is that, oh, the poor farmers, they've lost their property. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later, how that relates to climate change, a climate crisis. I'm not going to call it climate change, climate crisis, climate emergency. I'm talking about animal agriculture now. But right now I just wanted to talk about also the Murdoch media. There's actually an article in the New York Times. Now, I'm not a fan of the New York Times. They're just another propaganda arm of the military-industrial complex and the national security state and of corporations. But they did happen to do an article which was, sometimes they'll do something that's not too bad. And this one was about, it's called How Rupert Murdoch is Influencing Australia's Bushfire Debate. Critics see a concerted effort to shift blame, protect conservative leaders, that'd be Scott Morrison, the awful wannabe authoritarian in Australia, the Prime Minister, and divert attention from climate change. Now, you may have noticed on Twitter, I don't know, but if you might see a hashtag about arsonists in relation to the Australian fires. This hashtag arsonists in relation to Australian fires has been, obviously, somebody's paid for that, and I'd say that would probably be either the coal industry or the oil industry or the Murdoch media. But they're trying to pretend now that these fires are caused by arsonists. Yes, of course, that can happen, that an arsonist can cause a fire, and that did happen, I think it was a few years ago. Somebody caused a fire in one of the towns, and a lot of people died. This can happen, but this is not caused by arson. What is happening in Australia is the climate emergency in full bore, because we are a country that is already dry. It's sort of a hot country, Australia, and so it's not surprising, of course, that we in Australia would be the hardest hit, one of the hardest hit when it comes to fires, because we're already a sort of a dry country. But the climate crisis has caused so much drought and such crazy temperatures. We're talking 45 degrees Celsius plus, and sometimes in some places closer to 50 degrees. And that's dotted all around, various parts of Australia. The New South Wales area has had 45 plus degrees Celsius in many towns. This is sort of like, these are not tenable. They're not survivable, like tenable for living. They're not survivable if they continue to rise like this. When you get past 38 degrees Celsius, you probably shouldn't even be working outdoors or doing much outdoors, and we're talking 45 plus. So have a look at the temperature maps in Australia during the summer. Check them out fairly regularly, and you'll see the kind of temperatures we're talking about now. They're not okay. This is not okay for survival. So with the temperatures, with the ongoing drought, and this government sort of seems to think that this drought it'll end. That's funny. That's funny that they think it will end. It's unlikely that a lot of this drought is going to end, because this is not going to get any better. If anything, it's going to get worse. And at the very least, and that's unlikely, it's going to stay the same. It is going to get worse and worse. And I dread to think what Australia is going to be like in 5 years, let alone in the middle of the century. Because this is already crazy. It's insane. So if you've been following it, you can see how insane it is. It's really crazy. I mean, honestly, I'm grateful that I moved to this island. This was one of the reasons I moved to Tasmania, is because we could see that it was getting really a bit nuts on the mainland. We thought this is probably what's going to happen, and so we moved here about 13 years ago. But we're affected on this island, and this island has really cool temperatures compared to the mainland. We had 180,000 hectares burn at the beginning of last year, and it was no fun, I can tell you. And the smoke was just awful. We couldn't stay outside for more than 5 minutes, and we were told we needed to probably leave, but we thought we waited, and fortunately the embers didn't come across the river, but we could see the flames on the hills across the river. Okay, so back to this Murdoch thing, and I do want to talk about Twitter. If you have a look on Twitter, there's not only this arsonist thing, but talking about Twitter being a propaganda arm of the national security state, just digressing for a moment, just have a look at all the anti-Iranian stuff that's coming up now, and blaming Iran for the Ukrainian jet that's downed and so forth. It's really just, Twitter is just a sewer, basically. I can't even stand it sometimes looking at it. It's just, sorry, I've got something in my eye. It's just appalling. And it's just like Google and Facebook. They've all become just propaganda arms of the national security state, the military-industrial complex, and corporations, and people like Rupert Murdoch. Rupert Murdoch must have a good old laugh. He's basically got it sewn up in Australia that most of the all the print media and online media and so forth, TV, it's all controlled mostly by Rupert Murdoch. So he's basically almost like a prime minister maker. He can rip down prime ministers. I think he helped put Scott Morrison in government, because it's non-stop everything against any other party besides a full-on conservative party like the Coalition, the Rupert Murdoch. They're absolutely relentless in their smearing. Anyway, so this is what I just want to read some of this from how Rupert Murdoch is influencing Australia's bushfire debate by Damien Cave, January 8th, 2020. Wombayan Caves, Australia. Deep in the burning forest south of Sydney, this week, volunteer firefighters were clearing a track through the woods, hoping to hold back a nearby blaze, when one of them shouted over the crunching bulldozers, quote, "Don't take photos of any trees coming down," end quote. He said, quote, "The greenies will get a hold of it and it'll all be over," end quote. Okay, so this is an interesting one, because you'll see there's been hashtags trying to blame the Greens, that's the Green Party, for the lack of backburning. Now, even that's actually not true, because they do support backburning. But even the fire chief, the New South Wales fire chief, I think that's who he is, has said that the backburning is not the be-all, end-all of it, and it's actually got a lot to do with the actual climate and droughts. So even fire chiefs disagree with this ridiculous blaming the Greens. This is a typical thing that the Rupert Murdoch media put out, you know, the News Corps, or News Corps we like to call it, CORPSE. You know, this is a typical thing that they like to put out. They like to try and shift blame to anything but the climate-denying Scott Morrison, whom we have in office, and I don't know who on earth voted for this man. He's a wannabe authoritarian, so is a lot of the people that are surrounding him. He has been a climate denier. Now he's pretending he wasn't a climate denier, but he's still trying to make it all about all sorts of other things rather than actually addressing the problem, the actual issue. You know, you can do all the backburning you like, but if the climate is crazy, it's not going to make any difference. When things are dry and hot and it's just ongoing and it's unrelenting, that's, you know, this is the sort of apocalyptic things that are happening right now. So, but this is what the Scott Morrison government's been trying to do ever since they've been, well, unfortunately, the Conservatives have been. Now, I'm not saying the Labor Party's much better, they're a bit better, but they still want to support the coal industry. They haven't got many ideas of how we can move away from coal and fossil fuels. And what on earth are we still doing driving fossil fuel cars, for goodness sake? I mean, I often say, what on earth are we doing driving around these tons of steel, fossil fuels, at this late stage when there's been electric cars were around in the 60s, I think, and then the fossil fuel industry managed to buy the patents or something, or stamp them out, and then, you know, it's been vanished. And now, you know, where are the electric cars in Australia? You know, where are the electric rails that go into, or the rails that are going into from the rural areas? I mean, most people have to drive around here because they've got such a poor transport. They've actually been making public transport worse in rural areas. I mean, it truly is. You couldn't make this up, how bad this is. It's like the Keystone Cops. It's, you know, the dodgy brothers of all times, the sort of the way these governments have been dealing with this, or not dealing with it, basically. Because they knew about all this in the 80s. They knew how bad the climate, that this what was going to happen now. They knew it was going to happen. It wasn't through lack of science. They knew about this in the 80s. I know that for a fact because a friend, somebody close to me, used to talk to these politicians at that time in a professional sense. They're an environmental scientist, and they talked, and these people knew about it back then, but they did not want to do anything. They didn't want to risk their careers, and this is where we are now. Okay, so the idea that, quote, the greenies, end quote, or environmentalists would pose measures to prevent fires from ravaging homes and lives is simply false, and they've got a link to that. But the comment reflects a narrative that's been promoted for months by conservative Australian media outlets, especially the influential newspapers and television stations owned by Rupert Murdoch. And it's far from the only Murdoch-fueled claim making it the rounds. His standard-bearing national newspaper, The Australian, has also repeatedly argued that this year's fires are no worse than those of the past. Not true, scientists say, noting that 12 million acres have burned so far, with 2019 alone scorching more than scorching more of New South Wales than the previous 15 years combined. On Wednesday, Mr. Murdoch's News Corp, the largest media company in Australia, was found to be part of another wave of misinformation. An independent study found online bots and trolls exaggerating the role of arson in the fires, at the same time that an article in The Australian making similar assertions became the most popular offering on the newspaper's website. And I noticed that at the time. I could see these bots and trolls going around trying to change the narrative and smear people that were trying to say otherwise. It's all part of what critics see as a relentless effort led by the powerful media outlet to do what it has also done in the United States and Britain: shift blame to the left, protect conservative leaders, and divert attention from climate change. You know, sometimes I think all these people, Trump and Obama and all the ones that have done nothing and have helped their buddies in the fossil fuel industries and the weapons industries and military-industrial complex. By the way, the military-industrial complex is one of the greatest polluters. And let's not get started about animal agriculture and the massive contribution animal agriculture does with the climate crisis. And that's you and me. We can do something about that and become vegan. It's the other inconvenient truth, and we can keep pretending that it's not a thing, but it is a thing, a big thing. So let's walk and chew gum at the same time. Let's be vegan, and let's get involved in nonviolent civil disobedience and all of that. We can do all of that. We can walk and chew gum at the same time. So, you know, but this is what I've noticed about, you know, these bots and trolls. All these people, as I was just about to say, all these people that have been promoting this narrative and trying to keep their pockets lined by not addressing this issue, they should all be put on a boat and pushed out to sea, or they should be dropped on an island that's going to be covered in water due to the climate crisis, or something, or shot out to another planet. You know, I don't know. It's just, you know, these are the people. And unfortunately, people put them in power. I don't know who voted for Scott Morrison. I really don't. But they need to be pushed out to sea on a boat. Anyway, it's really reckless and extremely harmful, end quote, said Joel Gagas, an award-winning climate scientist at the Australian National University. And by the way, all these climate scientists, there's been this huge study to date, 119 countries, 40,000 farms, from farm to fork, 90% of all the foods we eat. And the result of that, the conclusion was that adopting a plant-based diet is the single biggest thing one can do to address the climate emergency. Do you see anybody talking about that? And that includes the Greens, the Green Party, anywhere? The Labour Party, anywhere? You wouldn't see the Conservatives doing it, but these so-called and environmental groups, including Extinction Rebellion is actually promoting this ridiculous notion of sustainable, in quotes, sustainable animal agriculture. That is a nonsense. I've talked about this I've done 3 or 4 videos on this, so check them out in my playlist about veganism or veganism and anthropogenic climate change. So I won't go into it here. But this is the sort of ridiculous nonsense that Extinction Rebellion, who claims to be radical, seriously, and they're smearing vegans that are talking about this and saying, please, this isn't relevant. It is relevant. It's very relevant. Anyway, anyhow, he goes on, quote, "It's insidious because it grows. Once you plant these seeds of doubt, it stops an important conversation from taking place," end quote. Absolutely. News Corp denied playing such a role. Quote, "Our coverage has recognised Australia as having a conversation about climate change and how to respond to it," end quote. The company said in an email, quote, "The role of arsonists and policies that may have contributed to the spread of fire are, however, legitimate stories to report in the public interest," end quote. I don't like the word evil, but sometimes I think this behaviour of people like Rupert Murdoch and those that, run those papers and news sources is just evil behaviour, really. Because this is basically, we're on an ecocide, we're on a track to ecocide, we're on a track to imminent human extinction and taking all these other innocent species with us. This is what's coming. Australia, I hate this saying, but is a canary in the coal mine, because what's happening in Australia right now is coming for you. It's coming to you in your country. If you think this is just something that's going to happen to Australia and, oh, poor Australia, that's because they're dry, what do you think is going to happen eventually to your country. And why aren't you vegan? Why aren't you vegan? There's no excuses for this. Apart from the fact we don't need animal products at all to survive and we can easily meet all our nutrition requirements from plants and other non-animal sources, there is absolutely no reason we should be eating animal products, and there's no excuses to deny the science. If you are aware of the science and you're still not vegan, then why? Why are you not vegan? So, anyway, yet for many critics, the Murdoch approach suddenly looks dangerous. They are increasingly connecting News Corp to the spread of misinformation and the government's lackluster response to the fires. They argue that the company and the coalition led by Prime Minister Scott Morrison are responsible, together as a team, for the failure to protect a country that scientists say is more vulnerable to climate change than any other developed nation. So I won't read the whole article, but it's a good article. Please read it, how Rupert Murdoch is influencing Australia's bushfire debate. It's really, just try and imagine if, basically every time you look at the news, and of course I get, things about Australia, that it's just all about things going up in flames and, 1 billion animals now dead, and yes, it's awful, all the koalas, there's like even 25,000 koalas just in one area, Kangaroo Island. But koalas, we need to stop fetishizing certain animals and realize that all these sentient beings, whether they're cows, sheep, koalas, dolphins, whales, fish, they all deserve the right not to be used as property. They all deserve the right not to be used for entertainment. All these koalas, we only care about koalas because we want to look at them. We don't actually see them as individuals, sentient beings, and we don't see cows and sheep and other animals as individual sentient beings that are on this planet for their own reasons. They're not here for our entertainment. They're not here to be used as food or clothing or any other reason. They're not here for that. So that's why we need to be vegan. That's the first reason. The second reason is that those two memes I'm going to show you again, and I'm sorry for the people who regularly watch this channel, but I have to keep pressing this issue. I have to keep pressing it because it's just a matter of we're looking at imminent human extinction. And if I don't believe that, I actually think it's too late at this point. We have runaway global warming, but still, we can mitigate some of the things that are going to happen. We can actually maybe save a few species. We may go because we're definitely going to go because we're on the front lines of the 6th mass extinction, but there may be other species we can prevent from going. And, we may be able to slow it down somewhat. But firstly, we have to take personal responsibility and go vegan. And that's a political choice too. The personal is a political. It's a science-denying thing to pretend that being vegan isn't important. That is science-denying. Then we become a climate science denier if we pretend that becoming vegan, is not important. A moral imperative at this point. So I implore you, please consider going vegan. Check out howtogovegan.org. I don't do this for fun. I don't make any money off this channel. I've never made any money off promoting veganism. I don't make any money, period. I do this hoping that a handful of people, I don't care if it's one person or 20 or whatever. I'm just hoping that people will take notice of some of the things I say. It's not a judgment thing. It's not, I'm better than you, I'm vegan. It's not any of that. I can just see it's just so important, and it's not being talked about really hardly at all. And it's not about cutting back and eating a bit less meat. I mean, when I mention I'm vegan, people go, oh, I hardly eat any meat. I don't want to hear that from anybody. That does not impress me, because animals are sentient and we don't need to be eating, wearing, and using them. We don't need it to survive. I've been vegan 15 years. We don't need it at all to survive. There's millions and millions of vegans on the planet now. We don't need it. So it doesn't impress me saying I only eat a little bit of meat. That's somebody that you've eaten. Somebody has suffered. Their whole life has been basically enslaved and killed and tortured. And it doesn't matter if it was on some stupid, happy farm. That's nonsense. They still have their children taken away from them. They still have procedures done on them. They're still killed in the same awful slaughterhouses. It doesn't impress me. And it doesn't impress me if you're from Extinction Rebellion and you're not vegan. It doesn't. It does not impress me. I've had somebody from Extinction Rebellion in this country saying, oh, well, you know, you keep mentioning veganism on my threads. You know, you're spamming my threads. Seriously. You know? I mean, I'm spamming their threads with science. Anyway, that's all I wanted to say. I just, you know, over here in the distance, we have these beautiful hills, and there's a river, and then there's the hills behind it. And often now, in summer, we have smoke covering the hills, this year in particular, and that is smoke from the mainland. Smoke from the mainland has crossed across the Bass Strait and is covering our hills. Now, this isn't about whether I get to look at the hills or not. This is about how appalling that is, how bad the fires are. And people in Chile have got smoke from Australia coming over their way. And I feel every day for all those people that are panicked. I know what it's like to feel like, oh my God, we're going to lose our house, or we're going to lose our land, or we're going to lose our lives. I haven't had that, the level of I'm going to lose my life, although in the back of your mind you don't know what's going to happen or where it's going to come from. But I know what it's like to feel that kind of anxiety. And those people on the mainland, they're having it much, much worse than what the people across the river had it last year. Much worse, much, much worse. And the animals being burned alive. Just try and imagine that for a moment. Being burned alive and nowhere to go. If you're in a paddock, being raised to be killed. You and your children in the paddock being raised to be killed, seeing walls of flame and smoke, suffocating smoke, and then you're burnt alive. Just imagine that. And they're only there because we are not vegan. That's why they're there, because we create demand for animal products, and they are bred into existence to be used as property, to be their children taken away from them, and all sorts of awful things done to them, and then in the end they're killed in a horrific slaughterhouse. There is no such thing as humane use of animals, and even if there were, it would still be wrong. Anyway, I'm going to wrap it up here. I'm going to talk more about this because the trolling about this issue, about Australian fires on Twitter, is appalling, and those people should be absolutely ashamed. And these bot farms or whatever else they are. People who run these bot farms, these troll farms, where they obviously have no moral compass whatsoever. Anyway, thanks for watching. My name's Trish Roberts. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Click the notifications bell, otherwise you won't receive notifications when I drop a video. Please click the like button if you like the content. Please go vegan. Check out howtogovegan.org. Till next time, bye for now.